Welcome back to the second part of tables. There will be three parts, the third part being GUI. This is the table we created in the last tutorial. We loaded item from 1 to 1,000, which is actually 0 to 99.9. And then we're going to come down and open an Eclipse to start our tutorial. And we're going to press OK. That's where we want it stored. And once it comes up, we need to create an executable class or a program if you're a COBOL programmer. Of course, we want to open up to source and we want to get to the programs that we have already created. I'm going to go ahead up here. I'm going to left click on source. I want to create a new Java JFrame, and I want to call this TLSN2. And if you type it correctly, it looks like this, LSN2, once again 2, and I'm going to say finish. Now, one of the things we need here is to be able to pass variables because we're going to call a read to build our table, to fill our table into to fill our table up with information from the database. So I'm going to come over and under source, I'm going to left click, I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to say new and class. And I want this one to be called working storage 2. And last time it was called working storage because you can see it over here. And I'm going to say finish. And it gives me a very basic storage. Now to save time, I like to always reuse. So I'm jumping over and I'm going to grab just this part because I'm only going to need, that's all I'm going to need. And I'm going to go ahead and paste it where I want it, which is right there. And of course, I really don't want that particular. So what I've already done is I've set up a table to load into working storage. And we can see that I now have a string, which is an alphanumeric variable, with a 4-dimensional table. And each one of these is the table. And it's going to be called item, lowercase. And it's going to be string to initialize. It's going to be 2 positions, 3, and 3. And now, if you're not familiar with tables, I want you to think of a candy machine. What you're going to have, because there's a 2 here, you have 2 candy machines. Each candy machine can go, there's a front row and a back row. So you have 2 rows, a depth of 2 to pick from. The next row is the columns down on it. This candy machine goes 3 rows down and 3 rows across. Alrighty, so we're going to go back to lessons. I'm going to get rid of, close that out. And what I need to do is I now need to call working storage so I can initialize those fields. So I'm going to jump back over here where I have things set up already so I can explain them. And I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to go ahead and paste it under the content panel. And I'm going to say, oh, you know what I need to do is I want to initialize working storage so that I can use those variables when I perform a read or any other class. And as you can see, I want to create a read table, which is right here. So I'm actually just going to do this because we all know I'm lazy about typing. And I want to come back up to source, left click, then I want to right click, and I want to say new and class because I do not need an executable module. I'm going to do it this way. And of course, I'm just going to cut and paste. I've called mine capital R, read, capital T, BL, and I'm going to say finish. So that gives me my basic. Now, one of the things, of course, where you already know I'm going to do is I'm going to come through and I'm going to have this because I've already been working on it so I don't run into a million errors. And I'm going to just replace this because it's set up. So one of the things we're going to do is come through here, and this is just an example for you for later on when you're working in tables. You can throw this right here into any class member, which tells me I want to wipe out this and set the entire table back to nulls. You can do that in any class member. I just wanted an example. And then we're going to come through and we're going to initialize the table, the subs that I'm going to be using to load the table. So M, B, D, and R are all set to 0, and I'll explain those as we go along. And then last is set to Y, and it's a string field. And then, of course, we put the database in, and the database name where it's stored, well, it's / because I told you if you put single slashes, it won't find it. It doesn't accept that. And the table we did create was table SQL. And then these are the standard setups you can follow. And then we're going to go ahead and say the table that we're actually reading from is table. As you can see, that's set up, read from table. And then we're going to go ahead and loop through the read. We're going to read every record in the table, and then we'll come down and we'll execute. And if we run into an error, we'll display one of our exceptions. So we come through, and the first thing I want to do is I'm going to create a string, a temporary variable that will not be able to be passed anywhere except for be used in this particular class. And I'm going to read the first record of the database item, and I'm going to put it into item. Okay, as you can see, that has a capital I, and this is a lowercase I. And the first thing I want to do is check to see if my rows across is less than 2. In Java, 0 is considered a sub, so it's 0, 1, 0, 1, 2. And if it's less than 2, it will do this. So one of the things we want to keep an eye on is the fact that it uses 0, because if you're a COBOL programmer, it's something that you have problems with. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to read this 3 times. And of course, this is going to be 0, 0, 0. And then each time we read this, the first time through it's 0. Then we're going to increment it by 1, 1, and then 2. So we've loaded 3 into the across. And once we've done that, we want to go ahead and say, okay, now we want to go down, and we want to do this for 3 times. Each time, what we're going to do is load 1 down, and then we're going to increment down by 1, and we're going to set the across to 0, and then we'll just process this again, and then increment this. And once we've done all that, we're going to go ahead and go to the back row, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to set the back row, we're going to increment it, and we're going to do this, set these back to 0 and spin through these, and then we'll come down to the second machine, and we're going to, of course, load the second machine, and we'll spin through each one of these until this is done. When we're done, and we've filled both machines completely, it's going to say if last equals y, which it is because that's how we initialized it. It's going to go ahead and move the final item into the machine, and then set last as no. So even if we continue reading, we will no longer move anything to the table. And if there's any problems, we'll get the exception. So real quick, if I did this correctly, we're going to come over to right-click on tables, and of course I want to run it, and I want to run the Java application. And if I did that, the table comes up because we created the table. But the first row of our front is going to be 0, and the last one's going to be 8. Now, if we go to the back row, of course, it's 9, and it's going to be 17. Now we jump into the second machine. While the very first item on the second machine is 18 on the front, and the very last one is 26. The very first row of the back row of the second machine is 27, and the very last one is 38. So our table is completely loaded, 4-dimensional, and is working. And in the next tutorial, we're going to go ahead and go through doing a GUI setup so that we can see how the GUI would work, and that would be the final one for the tables. So thank you for spending your time with me. I appreciate it, and we'll talk.